Act 1. City of Dreams, City of Nightmares. In the years immediately following the Second World War, Los Angeles was the undisputed capital of dreams. It was a sun-drenched metropolis, a beacon of glamour and opportunity, drawing aspiring starlets and hopeful dreamers from every corner of America. They came seeking fame, fortune, and a chance to have their names written in the glittering lights of Hollywood. But beneath the shimmering surface of post-war optimism and cinematic fantasy, there was another Los Angeles, a city of shadows, of back-alley deals, corrupt cops, and broken dreams, a city where the line between glamour and depravity was dangerously thin. It was in this city of stark contrasts, a city of angels and demons, that a young woman named Elizabeth Short arrived, hoping to become a star. Instead, she would become the victim of a crime so brutal, so bizarre, and so profoundly mysterious that her name would be forever etched into the dark folklore of American crime. She would become the Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short was born in Massachusetts in 1924. She was a strikingly beautiful young woman, with pale blue eyes and a cascade of jet black hair, which she often adorned with flowers. Her early life was marked by instability and a yearning for something more. She drifted between her estranged parents, working odd jobs, and dreaming of a life on the silver screen. Like so many others, she saw Hollywood as her ultimate destination. She was drawn to the glamour, the excitement, and the promise of transformation. In her late teens and early 20s, she moved back and forth across the country, spending time in Florida, Chicago, and eventually Los Angeles. She was a transit, a ghost in the city's vast landscape, moving between cheap hotels and the apartments of various acquaintances. She was known to be a drifter, a young woman who was often lonely and melancholic. Despite her vibrant appearance, she was a part of the city's vast, invisible population of aspiring actresses, waitresses, and dreamers, all living on the edge, all hoping for their big break. She was known to be naive and perhaps too trusting. She was a beautiful, fragile moth, drawn to the dangerous flame of Hollywood. In January of 1947, that flame would consume her entirely. On the cold, crisp morning of January 15th, 1947, a local resident named Betty Berzinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter through a vacant lot in the residential neighborhood of Leimert Park. She noticed something pale lying in the overgrown grass. At first, she thought it was a discarded store mannequin, broken in two. As she moved closer, a wave of horrific realization washed over her. It was not a mannequin. It was the naked, mutilated body of a woman. The scene that greeted the first LAPD officers was one of unparalleled brutality. The body of Elizabeth Short had been subjected to a level of savagery that stunned even the most hardened homicide detectives. She had been cleanly sliced in half at the waist. Her two halves posed a foot apart in the grass. Her body had been completely drained of blood, giving her skin a ghostly, marble-white appearance. Her face was a grotesque mass of violence. The killer had carved a terrifying, permanent smile onto her face, slicing her mouth from ear to ear in a horrific Glasgow smile. She had been beaten, her body covered in cuts and bruises. There were rope marks on her wrists and ankles, indicating she had been bound and tortured for days before her death. But amidst the savage brutality, there was a chilling element of precision. The bisection of her body had been performed with clean, surgical skill, suggesting the killer possessed anatomical knowledge. There was no blood at the scene, indicating she had been killed elsewhere, and her body moved to the vacant lot after being meticulously cleaned. This was not a crime of passion. It was a ritualistic, sadistic murder, a carefully staged tableau of horror designed to shock and terrify. The killer had not just murdered Elizabeth Short. He had turned her body into a grotesque work of art, a message to the world. The mystery of the Black Dahlia had begun. Act 2, the media circus and a failing investigation. The discovery of Elizabeth Short's body was a match thrown on the gasoline of post-war Los Angeles journalism. In the 1940s, the city was home to a dozen fiercely competitive daily newspapers, each one desperate for the most sensational, headline-grabbing story. The murder of a beautiful, aspiring actress was a story made in heaven, or rather, in hell. The press descended on the case with a ravenous hunger, and in their frenzy, they would both create a legend and irrevocably corrupt a police investigation. The first order of business for the police was to identify the victim. They sent her fingerprints to the FBI, who quickly matched them to a 1943 arrest record for underage drinking. The victim was 22-year-old Elizabeth Short. Reporters, often working through corrupt sources within the LAPD, got her name almost immediately. In an act of stunning ethical breach, a group of reporters from William Randolph Hearst's Los Angeles Examiner contacted Elizabeth's mother in Massachusetts, pretending that her daughter had won a beauty contest, slowly coaxing personal details and photographs from her before brutally informing her that her daughter had been murdered. It was the press who gave her the moniker that would make her immortal. At the time, a popular film noir, The Black Dahlia, was playing in theaters. Reporters, noting Elizabeth Short's black hair and her penchant for wearing black clothing, began calling her the Black Dahlia. The name was perfect. It was glamorous, mysterious, and tragic. It stuck instantly. Elizabeth Short, the real person, began to disappear, replaced by the mythical, one-dimensional character of the Black Dahlia. The media coverage was relentless and often wildly inaccurate. Newspapers published lurid, fabricated stories about her life, painting her as a promiscuous, troubled seductress who moved to the dark underbelly of Hollywood. They created a caricature, a fictional femme fatale who, in their narrative, had brought her terrible fate upon herself. This sensationalism had a devastating effect on the police investigation. The public was inundated with false information, making it nearly impossible for detectives to separate fact from fiction. The LAPD, for its part, was overwhelmed. They launched one of the largest manhunts in the city's history. Hundreds of officers were assigned to the case. They interviewed thousands of people, friends, acquaintances, former lovers, and anyone who might have had even a passing contact with Elizabeth Short in the weeks before her death. But the investigation was chaotic from the start. The crime scene in Labyrinth Park had been trampled by dozens of reporters and curious onlookers before it was properly secured, destroying any potential evidence. Because Elizabeth had been a transient, tracing her final days was a nightmare. She had no fixed address, no steady job. She was a ghost even before she was a victim. The case was further complicated by a bizarre and unprecedented phenomenon, the false confessions. In the weeks following the murder, over 60 people, mostly men, came forward to confess to being the Black Dahlia killer. Each confession had to be thoroughly investigated and, eventually, debunked, wasting thousands of hours of precious police time. These were troubled, attention-seeking individuals, drawn to the gruesome celebrity of the case. The investigation was drowning in a sea of false leads, media-fueled hysteria, and public confessions, while the real killer remained a phantom, watching the chaos he had created from the shadows. Act 3, A Killer's Taunts. About a week after the murder, the killer, or someone claiming to be the killer, decided to join the media circus. On January 21st, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner received a phone call. The caller, a man, congratulated the paper on their coverage of the murder and said he would be sending them some of the victim's belongings to prove he was a killer. He ended the call by saying he planned to turn himself in, but not yet. He wanted police to chase him a little longer. A few days later, a mysterious package arrived at the newspaper office. It was a manila envelope, addressed with words and letters cut and pasted from movie ads and newspapers. The message on the front read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." Inside the package was a collection of Elizabeth Short's personal items: her birth certificate, social security card, photographs, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. The items had been carefully wiped clean with gasoline, destroying any potential fingerprints. The arrival of this package sent a fresh wave of excitement and terror through the city. It seemed to be a genuine communication from the murderer, a direct taunt to the police and the press. The address book, with its embossed name, immediately made its owner, a wealthy nightclub owner and Hollywood figure named Mark Hansen, a prime suspect. Elizabeth Short had briefly lived in a room at his home, and he was one of the last people known to have spoken to her. However, the investigation into Hansen ultimately led to a dead end. Shortly after the package arrived, a series of bizarre handwritten letters, also composed of cut-and-pasted words, began to arrive at various newspapers. They were filled with taunts and cryptic messages. One read, "I will give up in Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." Another was a crude drawing with a chilling message that seemed to hint at another murder. The LAPD was now dealing with a killer who, like Jack the Ripper before him, was using the press as his personal stage, playing a sadistic game with the public's fear. However, the authenticity of these communications has always been a subject of intense debate. Were they truly from the killer? Or were they the work of a clever hoaxer, someone from within the newspaper industry, or the public who was obsessed with the case? The LAPD themselves were divided. Some detectives believed the communications were genuine, while others were convinced they were red herrings. The most unsettling possibility is that the initial package containing her belongings was indeed from the killer, but the subsequent letters were the work of a copycat, a prankster who injected themselves into the narrative. This confusion was a perfect reflection of the case itself, a core of horrific, undeniable fact, surrounded by a swirling vortex of myth, rumor, and deliberate deception. The killer had not just murdered a woman. He had created a mystery so dense and convoluted that it became almost impossible to navigate. He was a ghost, and he was an expert at covering his tracks, leaving behind a trail of confusion and misinformation that has persisted for over 75 years. Act 4, a gallery of suspects. The Black Dahlia case has never suffered from a lack of suspects. Over the decades, dozens of names have been put forward, each with their own compelling, if circumstantial, case. The list is a veritable who's who of mid-century Los Angeles, from famous celebrities to shadowy underworld figures. But a few key suspects have consistently dominated the investigation, their stories adding new layers of intrigue to an already labyrinthine mystery. Perhaps the most famous and chilling suspect is Dr. George Hodel. Hodel was a brilliant and prominent Los Angeles physician, a man who moved in the city's most elite circles. He was also a man with a dark side. He was known for his decadent parties, his involvement in the surrealist art scene, and his abusive, controlling nature. The case against him was championed, most famously, by his own son, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD homicide detective who became convinced his father was a Black Dahlia killer. The evidence Steve Hodel compiled is extensive and deeply disturbing. George Hodel was a trained surgeon, which would explain the surgical precision of the bisection. He had a secret room in his iconic Hollywood home where his son believes he tortured and murdered Elizabeth Short. A police surveillance bug placed in Hodel's home during a separate incest investigation involving his daughter reportedly picked up a chilling conversation where Hodel seemed to admit to the murder, saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia." They can't prove it now. Most damningly, Steve Hodel believes that 2 photographs found in his father's private collection are of a young Elizabeth Short, taken shortly before her death. While many investigators find Steve Hodel's theory compelling, the evidence remains circumstantial, and his father was never officially charged. Another prime suspect for many years was a man named Walter Bailey, a surgeon who lived just 1 block from the vacant lot where Elizabeth Short's body was found. Bailey's daughter was a childhood friend of Elizabeth's sister. His wife had died shortly before the murder, and some have speculated that a deteriorating mental condition, combined with his surgical skills, could have made him the killer. The timing and proximity are certainly suspicious, but like with Hodel, there was never any direct evidence to link him to the crime. Then, there is the strange case of Leslie Dillon. Dillon was a bellhop and an aspiring writer who contacted a police psychiatrist, Dr. Joseph Paul DeRiver, seeming to know intimate details about a murder that had not been made public. Dillon became the doctor's private obsession, and for a time, he was the LAPD's #1 suspect. They held him in secret for days, interrogating him relentlessly, but his stories were inconsistent, and it eventually became clear that he was likely a pathological liar who had gleaned his information from newspaper reports and was simply inserting himself into the story for attention. He was eventually released, another promising lead that evaporated into thin air. The list of suspects is long and varied. There was Mark Hansen, the nightclub owner whose name was on the address book. There was Woody Guthrie, the legendary folk singer, who was briefly investigated after sending a series of bizarre letters to one of Elizabeth's friends. There were dozens of other men, small-time criminals, jilted lovers, and shadowy figures from her past. Each suspect represents a different possible path the investigation could have taken, a different version of the story. The sheer number of plausible suspects is one of the key reasons the case has remained so compelling. The killer could have been almost anyone. He was a respected doctor. He was a troubled bellhop. He was a local surgeon. He was a phantom who could wear any face. Act 5, The Unsolved Legacy. So why? After more than 75 years, after one of the most extensive investigations in American history, has the murder of Elizabeth Short never been solved? The reasons are a complex mix of the era, the victim, and the crime itself. The investigation was undoubtedly hampered by the technology of the time. The lack of modern forensic techniques like DNA analysis meant that detectives were working with a severe handicap. But the failure was more than just technological. The LAPD of the 1940s was notoriously corrupt and often incompetent. The investigation was chaotic, with different departments failing to share information. And the media circus, fueled by the newspaper circulation wars, actively corrupted the case, creating a smokescreen of rumor and false information that made genuine police work nearly impossible. The victim herself, tragically, also played a role in the mystery. Elizabeth Short's transient, almost ghost-like existence in the months before her death made it incredibly difficult for police to establish a clear timeline of her final days. She had many acquaintances but few close friends, a string of casual dates but no steady boyfriend. She was a woman who moved through the city's shadows, making her an easy target for a predator. But the ultimate reason the case remains unsolved is likely due to the nature of the killer himself. He was careful. He was intelligent. He killed Elizabeth elsewhere, cleaned her body meticulously, and left it in a location with no connection to the crime itself. He left behind no fingerprints, no murder weapon, no reliable witnesses. He may have taunted the police, but he did so from a safe distance, revealing nothing of his true identity. He was a ghost who committed a perfect, horrific crime, and then vanished forever. The legacy of the Black Dahlia is profound. The case has become a cornerstone of Los Angeles noir culture, a symbol of the city's dark, seductive underbelly. It has inspired countless novels, most famously James Ellroy's masterpiece, The Black Dahlia, as well as films, television shows, and even video games. The story has become a cultural touchstone, a modern American myth. But in the midst of the myth-making, it is easy to forget the real human tragedy at its core. The victim was not the Black Dahlia, a one-dimensional character in a detective story. She was Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman with hopes and dreams, a daughter and a sister. Her identity was stolen from her, first by her killer, and then by the sensational media narrative that followed. Her life became a footnote to her gruesome death. She is a haunting reminder of the human cost of our collective obsession with true crime. The killer not only took her life, he took her story and replaced it with his own. And his greatest, final act of cruelty was that he got away with it, taking his secrets and Elizabeth Short's justice to the grave.